It Chapter 2 takes place 27 years after the first film. This time the characters are all grown up and that's about the only difference in the story. And that's it for the review. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye! I'm deeply conflicted about this film. I enjoyed some aspects a lot, but it's an incredibly flawed movie. It follows the same beats as the first film to the point where I don't know why this even exists. You could just watch the first movie and presume the It creature dies at the end. The films play out beat for beat almost identically. They did go into the creature's backstory and a few other things which I liked, but they touch on them so lightly it left me feeling quite unsatisfied. They had lots of little things that really captivated me, but they went over them so briefly. I would have loved to explore them more. The opening scene was extremely intense. It was a strong opening that immediately grabbed my attention, but sadly there was nothing at that level of intensity for the rest of the film. How do you expect me to be scared of Pennywise when the most intense and disturbing scene doesn't have anything to do with him? The film isn't scary, and that's fine. It's perfectly fine for a horror film to not be scary. That doesn't make it bad. I don't particularly think the first was scary either, but it was a bit more scary than Chapter 2. A few scenes work. The opening was intense. A scene with a little girl and that bit with the old lady from the trailer. They also have a shot where people in the background stopped and stared at one of the characters, kind of like that library scene from the first movie. That was creepy and it worked, but then so much of the rest completely misses the mark for a number of reasons. Firstly, the humour. Almost every time something even remotely scary happens to one of the principal characters, they undercut it with a joke, which makes any tension immediately evaporate. There is so much humour I'd class this as a horror comedy. Tonally, Chapter 2 is a complete mess. It also doesn't help that the characters are adults now. In the first film the characters are kids, so they feel more helpless, which makes it a bit more scary. In Chapter 2 they're adults and clearly capable of taking care of themselves, so you don't feel as worried for them and therefore you aren't so scared. And seeing grown adults run away from a spooky clown is kind of silly. And thirdly, it's not as scary because the Pennywise creature is just not in it very much, and when he is, he's incredibly inconsistent. He has multiple chances to kill people but doesn't for some reason. Over and over, these scary scenes just don't work, and I sat there thinking, you've gotta be fucking kidding. I did find a fair bit of the humour funny though, so at least that didn't fall flat on its face. I rewatched the first It a week before going to see this, and I think I appreciate it more now. I still have a lot of problems with it, but I can appreciate more about it. On the surface, it's about a group of kids coming together to fight off a scary clown monster, but under that you've got a fairly decent coming of age story about these misfits trying to find their place in the world and dealing with the loss of childhood innocence. Chapter 2 loses a lot of that undercurrent narrative and is simply about a bunch of people fighting a scary clown. Most of the characters lacked any sort of development. Yes, they were developed in the first movie, but this is set 27 years later with completely new actors. You need to give something to the audience so they can warm up and feel for what are pretty much brand new characters. We learn so little about their lives in those 27 years and I felt like I knew nothing about these characters. We get a tiny bit of information right at the start, but the film rushes past it so fast it's clear the movie isn't interested in character development. I think the filmmakers could have spent a little more time exploring some of these aspects, but they are brushed over so fast. The love triangle that was so strong in the first movie completely fades into the background. The chemistry just isn't there. I'd forgotten the love triangle even existed apart from the handful of times the film brought it up. Bill Hader as Richie pretty much carries this film on his own. He has the funniest parts and also the most dramatic. He's fantastic.
Fantastic!
The flashback scenes were a painful reminder that the adults just don't have that great chemistry that the original younger cast did. And like the first film, the movie is strongest when the group is together, so it doesn't help that the adults spend most of the film separated. I did really like that the adults looked like their child counterparts. We get flashbacks to them as kids being haunted by Pennywise. I'm not quite sure when these flashback scenes are meant to have taken place. They must have been before the final confrontation in the first film, but after the start of the first movie where they all discover Pennywise. So they take place somewhere in the middle of the first film, but if they were important, why didn't we see them in the first movie? because they weren't important. The flashbacks don't affect the story at all, and there's no tension because we know they all survive. I remember hearing they shot all of the flashback scenes in Chapter 2 at the time of the original movie, but they've clearly reshot some and had to digitally de-age the kids. There's a big difference between a 12 and 14-year-old. The CGI on their faces was incredibly distracting, to the point where I wish they wouldn't have bothered de-aging them at all. It would have bothered me less. Worse still, they altered their voices to raise the pitch, and it was so off-putting I couldn't even listen to what they were saying. In fact, I feel like they used far too much CGI in general. Some of the monster effects could have been done practically, and doing so would have gave them a more tangible feeling, and therefore they would have felt like a more credible threat. The town of Derry felt dead. Is it Derry or Dairy? Outside of a scene at a fair and a couple of shop employees, the town felt hollow and lifeless, and not in a good horror movie creepy town kind of way, but more like they forgot to hire some extras. Derry felt like a character in the first film. In Chapter 2, the characters would be walking through the town and there would be no one in sight. When they're at the Chinese restaurant, you only ever see a single waitress. They also go to a hotel and there's no staff at all. They have to check themselves in, serving themselves drinks. It was weird. The biggest problem this film has is that it's almost 3 hours long. I found myself becoming increasingly bored through the entire middle portion of the movie. You could easily cut out at least 30 minutes of this film without losing anything important. Large chunks of the middle of the film could be removed entirely. So many elements are completely pointless and go nowhere. Some scenes are dragged out for much longer than they need to be. So the film sets up that when the characters grew older, they left Derry and they forgot about all the traumatic events that happened when they were kids. They suffer from some kind of collective amnesia for some reason. I don't know, it's never explained. When they arrive back in town, they set about finding some objects that will help them defeat Pennywise. They then split up and we see them all individually go through the same scene over and over again. They go somewhere, something spooky happens, and then they leave. It's boring watching characters fumbling around, struggling to remember things that the audience already knows. We watched the first movie, we know what happened. And you don't know what the objects the characters are searching for are, so you can never tell if they were successful in their task until after the fact. At one point the film makes a big deal about a character getting his bike back, so I thought the object he was looking for was his bike. But then the bike is forgotten about and Pennywise gives the character the object he was looking for. Pennywise literally gives the character the item he needs to defeat Pennywise. What? Not to mention the whole bike thing was a waste of 10 minutes of screen time. Like, we never see it again, doesn't mean anything. Pennywise as a monster creature thing is inconsistent and ill-defined, which often left me confused. I had a similar problem with the first film and had hoped they'd clear things up in Chapter 2, but they don't. I thought Pennywise only went after kids, but he goes after adults too in this film. I know in the first movie one of the kids mentions the adult death rate is high, but we only ever see Pennywise go after kids. He deliberately hides away from adults. Anytime an adult shows up, he disappears. So I thought Pennywise only killed kids because that's what the movie was showing me, and the adult deaths were from them killing each other because everyone is so horrible in this town for some reason. There's a line somewhere about him wanting to scare his victims before he eats them because they taste better or something. But he kills people without scaring them first, and he scares the crap out of others and doesn't kill them for some reason. I found no logic or reason behind when the Pennywise creature harmed or didn't harm its victims, and this lack of defined rules meant I wasn't quite sure what I was supposed to be afraid of. Yeah, this stuff might be explained in the book, but I'm not reading a book, I'm watching a movie. I shouldn't have to read a book to understand a film. That just makes it a bad film. I'm going to talk about a few spoilers here, so skip to this time code to avoid them. If you don't care about spoilers or you've already seen the film, please feel free to just carry on watching. So they establish a rule that all beings must abide by the laws of its form. It's not entirely clear what that means. It sounds like when the Pennywise creature is small, it is weak, and when it is big, it's invincible. But it wasn't consistent. Multiple times he was small, yet the characters could never harm him. The characters could or couldn't hurt the creature only when the script chooses it to be the case. I also had trouble figuring out what was real and what was a hallucination. In one of the flashbacks, Eddie the germ kid, I think it was Eddie, goes into the basement of the drugstore and his mum is strapped to a table. So then a leprosy monster comes out, so Eddie runs out and leaves his mum there. So did he really leave his mum to die, or was his mother a hallucination as well? At some point the character mentions his mother is dead, but it's not clear if she died there in the basement or not. He doesn't show any guilt for leaving her behind. Oh, and Henry Bowers makes a return, the bully from the first movie. Why Pennywise hasn't killed him, I don't know. Pennywise breaks him out of an insane asylum and Henry runs outside and his dead friend is waiting for him in a car. After Henry gets in the car, his zombie friend actually drives away. So is this zombie real? I thought the zombie was meant to be in Henry's head. So how is it actually driving the car? Like, other people wouldn't be able to see this zombie, would they? If they saw it now, they'd see Henry sitting in the passenger seat and a self-driving car going down the road. I could be completely wrong, but how would that work? I don't know. Speaking of which, why is Henry Bowers even in the movie? He had a role in the first film. He lived in the town and posed a constant threat to all the kids. He was the reason the characters initially meet at the drugstore. He makes them lose their ammo for that bolt gun thing. His actions have consequences. In chapter 2, he is out of the picture entirely and the film forcibly brings him back in. Pennywise manipulates him into killing people, I guess. Why does Pennywise want him to do that? Can't Pennywise do it himself? Henry Bowers doesn't actually do anything. He gets screen time with his escape from the insane asylum and then shows up in front of the main characters only to get immediately killed. Nothing ever comes of it. The characters just killed someone and we never hear of it again. The whole subplot was completely pointless and should have been removed. He doesn't do anything and then he's dead. If there was a point to this character, I would love to know what it was. They also mention that all of the characters that left Derry can't remember Pennywise and suffer from some kind of amnesia. Mike is the only one who didn't leave the town and he calls them all back when Pennywise resurfaces. But when Stanley gets told he needs to go back to town and fight Pennywise, he decides to kill himself because he can't face up to the horrors. But they establish the character can't remember what happened. So Stanley kills himself because he can't face up to the horrors that he can't remember? So that makes perfect sense. Ha! Throughout the film they have a running joke about one of the characters who is a well-known writer being unable to write a good ending. Lots of people bring up that he's terrible at writing endings. So you would think with a running gag like that they would have something up their sleeve for a decent ending to the film. Sadly not. The ending was awful. The characters just call Pennywise names until he dies. I'd say chapter 2 was about on the same level as the first, maybe a bit below. The good parts were better than those in the first film, but chapter 2 has a lot of problems. What's irritating is that these problems seem so obvious and easily fixable that I'm surprised they never got addressed before release. A tough editor could fix most of these problems by just removing a lot of the useless subplots and pointless characters. There's a gem inside this movie somewhere trying to get out. The director has said he has a 6-hour extended cut, which makes me wonder if the additional footage would give a purpose to a lot of the scenes that are currently superfluous. I know I've been quite negative on the movie, but despite it being a very flawed film, I did have a good time. It was entertaining despite me being bored in parts. I think if you loved the first one, you'll certainly have a good time with this as well. For reference, I didn't think all that much of the first movie either. After watching it for a second time recently, I think I was initially a bit hard on the film, although I still have problems with it. You can check out my review on that if you'd like to know more.
Would you like to know more?
Chapter 2 is not all that scary at all. I found scary stories to tell in the dark scarier, but I enjoyed some of the spooky scenes and the humour was entertaining. I would have liked the script to explore some aspects in more depth. It Chapter 2 is an entertaining if flawed experience. There's plenty of stuff I enjoyed sprinkled throughout the film. It works on a more emotional level than the first one did. I'd give it a 5 out of 10, maybe a 4. It's probably closer to a 4, but I did like a few parts a lot. My initial reaction would have been a 6, but after sitting on it for a while, I'm going with a 5 because it has so many flaws I just can't get past. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe for future content. It really helps out the channel. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.